Well, first of all, thank you so much. It really is a pleasure to be with you guys today. I'm gonna share my screen and then just do a mic check with you, make sure that we're able to see my stuff here. Let's see, screen share, PowerPoint, and how are we doing? Can you see the big screen or do you see the presenter mode?
We see the presenter mode.
Shoot. Now this is, so after all those accolades, now you guys are gonna have to walk me through how to get it out of the stupid presenter mode. Anybody?
Try clicking on display settings. So up at the top in the middle, it says display settings. And it's next to in slideshow.
Boy, I feel challenged. In slideshow, display settings. I don't see what you're seeing. That's great.
So right above your presenter slide.
Mute, stop video, security, participants, new share, pause share. I don't think
I don't see those options.
Yeah, he's got, I think, extended display.
Mm-hmm.
So he needs to change his display to duplicate. I think he's got to hit the Windows P and change it to duplicate.
Duplicate. You are my hero, whoever was just speaking. Let's see if that does any better. PC screen only, maybe.
There we go. That's perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the main, you're just seeing the presentation mode?
That is correct.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's wonderful. All right, so let me try to catch up some speed and try to regain some confidence in you guys for inviting me today from this. So talk about FEMA Flexible. First of all, I'd like to thank the Magic team for inviting me to be a part of this. Their kudos, my fault. We had everything set up. We dialed in early to test the mics and all this other stuff. And at promptly 3:01, or at, I'm sorry, probably at 2:59, an IT gentleman walks in, promptly kicked me out of where I was sitting. So I had a whole conference room with, video screen and all this stuff all set up. And so I had to scramble and move into a different place. So, hey, that's what we do with FEMA flexibility, right? So always prepared, got to have a backup plan. So it is a pleasure to be with you guys today. It really is a double honor for me. I'm a Tennessee boy by heart and by background. I'm actually an East Tennessee guy. I won't hold that against you guys. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be part of the Tennessee crowd today. So I'm going to go through a couple of presentations, 24 slides in total. I'm going to go through them relatively quick. I don't want to rush through anything, but I just want to give and paint kind of an overview of who and what we are and what we're trying to do at FEMA and using geospatial technologies, data analytics, artificial intelligence, a whole wide gamut of things. And hopefully that will kick off some questions. If you got any questions, I guess the probably best way to do it is just to put them in the chat session as they come to you, and I'll try to get to them at the end of the conversation, see if we're missing anything at the end there. But once again, I'm very grateful to be a part of this. It's always a pleasure to be part of these kinds of conversations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about operational intelligence and how data analytics supports disaster operations. Last year, 2020, understatement of the year, was a significant year. I've been at FEMA for over a decade, and it was very trying on many fronts, notably, obviously, the entirety of the COVID response, which we're still dealing with. But it actually kicked off with a bang in early January 7th. There was an earthquake that affected Puerto Rico, the southwestern portion of Puerto Rico. I see one of my colleagues on the line here from Puerto Rico. We, in fact, FEMA actually worked with all the folks that are in Puerto Rico. There's a multi-interagency effort still there from Maria. One of the groups we worked with, the Civil Air Patrol, and they covered the impacted area probably the most imagery I've ever seen collected for an incident was just last January. They collected ground-based 360, handheld photos, aerial photos, satellite photos. It was just really amazing. And then followed that up, we had a number of tornadoes that affected the Southeast. Tennessee was hit real hard. I'm sure you guys can remember Chattanooga area got hit back in the early spring. Actually, right there, March 3rd. And then Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, there was just a number of tornadoes. And then we had the most active Atlantic hurricane season on record, combined with fires. You know, the entirety felt like the entire West Coast was on fire, while Louisiana was getting hit with repeat hits. So just an extreme disaster season. And on top of all of that, COVID. So, you know, it just really stressed the overall system, but it gave us a good opportunity to try to figure out how does data analytics, GIS, remote sensing, how can we provide better support to the disaster operations? And the way we do that, if you haven't been exposed to it, please allow me to talk about it. FEMA has really been championing since really about the Harvey, Irma, and Maria 2017 disaster season, championing this concept called community lifelines. And if you haven't heard about it, it's very related to and relatable to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, food, water, sheltering, power, communications, transportation, health and medical, those kinds of things. And we try to track impacts to those 7 lifelines in order to identify where we need to send people, where we need to send things like food, water, infant and toddler kits, and where to send money. A big thing that the US government does is actually we push out a lot of grants. Everything to us is a grant. So if an individual homeowner lost their belongings and was impacted by a disaster, and if they qualify, we provide financial assistance in the terms of grants, but we also provide grants to states, locals, tribes, territories, both before an incident and after an incident. So geospatial technologies aid in the delivery of all those grants. So this is how we do it. We actually do it in kind of a 3-phased approach. So there's the data that is needed, both pre-incident and post-incident, and that's what that line of demarcation there is. We bring it together. We try to do predictive analytics on it, and then we try to push that information into reports or infographics or consumable means that senior leadership can take for action. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. And then that's the whole trend analysis bit where we rinse, repeat, recycle, right? So it's like washing your hair with shampoo, rinse and repeat. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of these things, but it should be viewed very much as an iterative process, and all 3 of these things are going on at the same time to help senior leaders have better actionable information as they're dealing with very, very complex issues. So at the very, very high level, let me talk about that real quick. From a pre-incident standpoint, we're doing a lot of disaster modeling. We're using foundational level data. I'll talk about that in just a second. And then you're estimating impacts, and then you're validating those impacts. And those validations could come from a number of factors. They could come from a crisis management system like eTeams or WebUC or any number of systems that's tracking knowledge during a disaster. It could come from a plane. It could come from a satellite. It could come from folks on the ground with mobile applications. It could come from crowdsourcing. We're going to talk about all of that in this presentation. All of that data is then funneled over to a predictive analytics team that is doing lifeline related interdependency analysis. We'll talk about that too, to estimate resource requirements. And so that gives our operational intelligence group the opportunity to synthesize and provide context, and in fact, add that human analytic framework to it to give leadership that decision support advantage that they need in order to send the right people to the right place at the right time. So let's talk first about data. I love data. It's my jam. One of the things that we're working on actually with Tennessee, there's a national lab called Oak Ridge National Lab. They're in East Tennessee, up by the Knoxville area. And they're helping us use artificial intelligence, convolutional neural networks, those kinds of things, deep learning. I could throw buzzwords out at you all day, but we're working on extracting building outlines for every building in the United States. We're really close to completing that effort right now. And on top of that, we're trying to add occupancy class and certain attributes to those structures in order to define these lifelines that I'm speaking of, fire stations, police stations, nursing homes, hospitals, residences, industrial kinds of things. So you need all of this really good foundational data for everything that I just spoke about in that overall ConOps, right? You really need to have foundational level data. So we can do that from a estimation standpoint, and we can do that using geospatial methodologies and frameworks. But we're also partnering with crowdsourcing concepts like ERISA's GIS Core. If you haven't heard about ERISA's GIS Core, not an endorsement for them, but we routinely work with them on a number of things. They're a large organization that does a lot of disaster related work, and they're part of our crowdsourcing group. And just last summer, they went in and validated those Oak Ridge USA structures, helped tighten up the geometry of each structure. And then, what we're hoping to do with them is help validate those attributes to make sure that it is in fact a residential, a commercial, agricultural, industrial, those kinds of things. So it's a good way to use the crowd to validate foundational level data. When we get into a big disaster like a big hurricane, we turn to that same group and they shift from doing foundational into more response operational kinds of things. Once again, all related to the lifelines. So food, water, and shelter, power, communication, transportation, energy, those kinds of things. And they're looking for social media / traditional news networks, any kind of photos that they can grab off the internet and tie it back to a structure or to a place and try to help orient where they're seeing impacts by these lifeline components. And so it's a really quick way to bring in some real quick validation of impacts by content that's just out there on the internet. So it's a great way to tie all that together. Another way, and this is kind of going back to that ConOps that I spoke of, another way that we do it is we're using mobile applications, and there's a number of organizations that are out there collecting data through mobile technologies. So we're working right now. FEMA has a program called Urban Search and Rescue. They use mobile apps to go out and triage. They do hasty searches, primary searches, secondary searches, and they're tagging structures as they see them and quantifying that level of damage, major, minor, affected, destroyed. They're tagging it by lifeline. If it's a transportation issue, if it's a health and medical issue, they'll tag it. And so we're getting that near real-time information as the teams are sweeping through an area, and they're providing us even more additional context of what they're seeing on the ground. So it's a really great way to see all that. When the incident is large enough and it scales to a multi-county, maybe multi-state level, we're really relying on remote sensing, and that could be from a bevy of platforms, whether it's ground 360. We have cars that have cameras on top of them, 360 cars that will go in. We did that in Puerto Rico. Really high quality imagery that you could see the cracks on the sides of the foundations. That's some really good stuff. UAVs, of course, depends on I guess the part of the country you're at or your preference on how to call unmanned platforms, and they range from little tiny small things all the way up to really big things. And then there's a ton of aerial imagery providers, both private sector, corporations that fly, as well as government partners that fly, mainly within the NOAA realm. NOAA has some amazing capabilities that they fly, professional grade imagery post-disaster, and they make all that publicly available. And we partner a lot with a number of organizations like Civil Air Patrol, like National Guard, like state level DOTs. So there's a ton of imagery that's collected. And then, of course, there's this international community collecting amazing satellite imagery immediately following the disaster. So we're tracking all of that and trying to bring all that in and make use of it. Of course, a big explosion in what's on everybody's LinkedIn page is all about artificial intelligence. And there seems to be just an overabundance of people trying to do AI on post-incident optical imagery, visible imagery, what I would call visible imagery. There's a lot of folks doing it against that NOAA imagery that I spoke of. We're very aware of a number of folks doing that. We're also aware of folks like Civil Air Patrol. This is an example of Civil Air Patrol doing their own imagery processing and their own AI-derived damage assessments. Pretty amazing stuff. The first time I ever saw this, in fact, was last, gosh, what is that? January, February timeframe for the Nashville tornadoes. So right there in your backyard, I think, well, you're Memphis, so not your backyard, kind of close. There was a tornado that hit in Nashville area, and Civil Air Patrol they collected high resolution 3-inch imagery. In fact, this is an image from them that's 3D. It's 3-inch imagery in 3D. And on top of that, they did artificial intelligence to extract damage assessments. Really amazing things. They did all that from start to end, generally speaking, in about 24 hours. For a tornado, we did the same thing in hurricanes, and it took a bit longer. So geography and scale matters, of course. I'm not preaching to the choir on this one, but just amazing. So I mean, artificial intelligence has a lot of promise, but it also has a lot of challenges. And like I said, there was a number of folks out there doing artificial intelligence like work, using this bevy of imagery that's out there, just like modeling. And this is a famous quote from somebody, not me, that said this, so I can't even remember the guy's name. All models, let's see, all models are wrong, some are useful. So that's kind of what we're seeing with artificial intelligence. All the artificial intelligence models so far have challenges. Some are more useful than others, but it's great that the community's getting out there and really trying to fine tune and tweak this. The day is very, very soon, and will be coming very soon, that we'll have those models tuned just right to the right sensor at the right time, the right place, and we'll have those damage assessments much faster. And those damage assessments really mean so much, especially to the response community, to determine impacts, to help us identify what kind of resources are needed. So it's really exciting to see the community advance so far in this space. So that's kind of from the data side. Let me move quickly through the predictive analytics side. FEMA's investing a lot of time in risk indices. In fact, I think we've probably got recently within the last year 4 or 5 that we've released, things like the RAPT tool, RAPT. There's the BRIC. There's a big one coming out of our mitigation program called the National Risk Index. That has, I don't want to speak too much about that because I would do them a disservice, but the teams involved in all of this, they've just been doing an amazing level of work. They're looking at 18 different hazard scenarios, and they're trying to identify risk. And what does that mean in relation to stability and indications of stabilization factors, especially as it relates to the lifelines. So once again, you're hearing this theme, especially from me, from a response perspective of tracking impacts by lifelines. So as we get into an event, and going back once again to that modeling perspective, we're modeling impacts as it's occurring. We're validating those impacts with post-incident observations, mainly from aerial or satellite imagery, sometimes with ground-based UAS or 360 ground car kind of imagery. Put all that together, and we try to predict where the heaviest impacts are, and we try to put that into a context of resource prioritization. So if you're looking at something like this Hurricane Sally perspective, we're using the wind speeds, we're using the flood extents, we're using our modeling capabilities to estimate where the heaviest impacts are and where to send those limited resources, search and rescue team, where to make sure that we can make sure that they are knowing where to go first and not just reaction to, say, the news media, or whoever's on the big TV at the time. You can also use all of these real-time feeds and sensors to estimate, and we're doing a lot of that now. We're automating a lot of our information as it's coming in to estimate impacts to residential structures or impacts to community lifeline related components. And so from those estimates, you can estimate resource requirements. 7 lifelines, once again, we've built 7 dashboards in multiple different views and formats. Most of them are publicly available. Some are not. Some of them are not shared publicly. Most of that has to do with licensing. You know, we're still in a commodity-driven world where there's a lot of information that is held from a licensing perspective. But where we can, we try to push all that out as publicly available because there's a need to share this stuff. And so there's a number of partners we work with to push information out, specifically related to things like gas stations or transportation impacts. So it's pretty amazing. Where we do share that information, we try to put it out on our hub page. So there's the link to that there at the bottom. We'll make sure you get these make sure you get these slides and these links just so you're able to go back and visit. We've got the 7 lifelines articulated on that front page as well. Plus we try to do things by incident. So if you're looking for winter storms, or if you're looking for floods, you're looking for tornadoes, all the imagery is curated around the lifelines and the incident. So that's a good way that we try to do ontology and curation. The last group that I really want to talk about very, very quickly is operational intelligence. Intelligence in this term is a frame of reference. Usually when you talk about intelligence, people kind of freak out. But there is a long-standing history of the use of intelligence. It's an analytic framework for us. It's how we approach things and think about things, and how to synthesize and add value and add context for our senior level decision makers. The reason why is, as you can imagine, I'm sure, there is a dearth of information coming in at us, whether it's from spot reports, situation reports, news, media. I mean, we just got gobs and gobs and gobs of information coming at us. And we've, this is an example of the National Response Coordination Center. This is where I'm currently at today. And there's big screen TVs all around. If you work in emergency management, chances are you work in an emergency operations center. And so much of the conversation is driven by what's up on the big screen. So we're very aware of that, and trying to understand. And one of the things that we're focused on and trying to do is to synthesize that and automate many of those analytic reports if and where we can. And so there's some really great technology coming out, especially AI related to natural language processing or natural language generation. It's exciting to see where the technology community is coming out with those kinds of things. It's really also amazing to see how the community is responding, especially in light of things like COVID, where states, locals, counties, tribes, private sector partners, public sector nonprofits are reporting information, especially as it relates to what they're doing from a resource requirement perspective. How much PPE are they pushing out? How many masks, how many gloves, how many this, that, the other? What are they asking for, and how are they filling those resource requirements? So it's really amazing to see how this technology has exploded just recently, and especially over the duration of this long pandemic, to see how people have really refined information flows. So it's pretty amazing. I'll just briefly talk about the explosion of infographics. At least from my perspective, more and more of this is moving towards what our ultimate goal is it's a 10-second product. Don't get me wrong. I love dashboards. I love visualization tools. That is definitely part of our strategy, but it's too much most times for our senior leadership to take a moment to dig into or dive into any one of those dashboards. And so we have a rule that we try to follow of 10 seconds or less. And so how do you convey all this information in 10 seconds or less? That's about the attention span that you can get with a senior leader. They have the attention span of a gnat. You know, don't tell them I said that. I know we're recording. Oh my goodness. But there's a lot of information coming at them. And so they need help distilling all this information. And so things like this, where we're identifying IMAT for us as incident management assistance teams. You know, how many IMATs need to deploy? Where do they need to go? Do they have enough resources? Can they meet the anticipated resource request based on what we're seeing? And so everything I just talked about falls into these types of products, right? We're tracking the risk, we're tracking the impacts, we're assessing damages, we're anticipating resource request requirements, we're paying attention to what the states and the locals and the counties are saying as what they're providing from a response perspective and their resources that they're sending to the area. And so we're trying to merge all of this together and give leadership that so what factor. The what, so what, now what? Do we need to take decisive action? So it's our job, we feel it's our responsibility to synthesize all of this and to provide leadership with contextualized information so that they can adjudicate anticipated resource requirements. So that's really my last slide. I do want to give you one last one to speak about our national coordination calls during large significant incidents. We will usually host a daily 2 p.m. Eastern. I know you guys are Memphis folks, but we'll do a 2 p.m. Eastern call. And that's where we share all this great information. We try to put out who's flying imagery, for what purpose, who's collecting ground-based information. You know, if USGS is out on the ground, you know, collecting high water marks or whatever the actions are. There's just this huge geospatial community, data and science community that's out there doing amazing things. And so one of our precepts is to do operational coordination. So, you know, this is our way of doing that. We try to make it as publicly available as possible. The links to all of this is once again back on that hub page. You can sign up for our distribution list there. So I think that is it for me. I'm going to pause and I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay. And once again, we'll get these slides out to you. But I'm going to pause and I'm going to go to the chat session here and see if I can catch up with you. But Michelle, maybe turn it over to you to help me walk through this.
Yeah, so if any of you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You can also use the raise hand button, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away.
Well, I have a question. Chris, you know, it looks like, I mean, I see you're employing some AI, and are you, what are y'all using as far as any off-the-shelf software? I imagine you're using some of the Esri software, but is there other off-the-shelf software that's in your workflow, or is a lot of this just you know, custom software that you've had developed for you, or that you all have developed internally?
That's a good question. It's a complicated answer. we're a somewhat large organization. I personally don't feel that we have near enough GIS here. I mean, I think anybody would argue that, right? So we're trying to violently take over where we can. I think the trends, let me see, I can answer that about 12 different ways. To directly answer your question, we use a mix of software, both open source and COTS, custom, you know, off the shelf is what we call it, COTS. There's commercial off the shelf. So there's a number of commercial products that we use, but we do have a number of folks that do open source development. And so it really just depends. I think the thing that I've seen, especially over the last 4 to 5 years, it's probably been around longer than that, maybe upwards of a decade, is this kind of this juxtaposition and kind of this almost this, what we know is coming is you've got the business intelligence world of R, and then you've got the geospatial community all in Python. And, there's not a terrible difference between the two of them. And so there's this weird kind of brackish water where we're all trying to figure out who's cooler, and so we don't have enough, there's too many problems for us to not figure out how to get everybody on the same sheet of music. And, thankfully things like Jupyter Notebook is a common place where people can find commonality. And then you start geeking out about regression models and, just, oh Lord, they get nuts on that kind of stuff. But I mean, that's kind of where we're at right now. I'm just being honest and transparent with you. There's a billion dashboards out there. We have traditionally been in the GIS space, and we are we're just dripping with dashboards. And then there's all kinds of people over there with, Tableau, Power BI, Click, all the other dashboards. And in fact, that's the main challenge that my leadership has asked us to try to tackle is, golly, which dashboard do you want me to go to? So, I mean, it's a challenge. So that's definitely why we're trying to fixate on that 10-second info product, right? If they want to do a deeper dive, fine, go to Tableau, fine, go to Power BI, fine, go to whatever, go to an Esri Ops dashboard. We want you to have that synthesis and not lead with the dashboard as the leading conversation. We want to provide you an analytic assessment that helps you to come up with additional requirements and ask deeper questions that may be addressed by the dashboard. But we're trying to get away from just answering the questions just with a dashboard. That was a long-winded answer. That was a complicated question.
That was great. Thanks.
I've got another complicated question for you. So as the GIO of FEMA, what does a normal day at work look like for you?
The first thing that came to mind is, when I try to recruit people to come work for us, look, there's a normal cycle. We have, floods and then tornadoes and fires and hurricanes, but then we usually have a downtime, after the hurricanes are over before we really get back into the flooding season. Well, that's a lie. I mean, I actually got a few people to buy into that, and then they got over here and they're like, God dang, you don't even take a weekend off. So, I mean, it's a constant thing. I personally happen to love it. I've been here a decade. I'm addicted to disasters. There is a natural rhythm to it. Even in the realm of COVID, there is a natural rhythm for the analytic framework. So this has been tried over many, many different incident types, from very small geographic areas to very large, complex geographies, multiple states, multiple regions. I personally am a really big fan of this concept of this lifeline concept that helps to diminish the chaos. I mean, I'm going to get off my soapbox here, but I mean, I've supported things like Hurricane Katrina and the Haiti earthquake, and we didn't have these frameworks. So, the more you have frameworks, the more you can automate. The more you can automate, the quicker you can get to a information node that helps a leader make a decision. So that's why we're in this business. And so that's what drives me is obviously automation, and that's a lot of our focus area.
Thanks. I have a question from Kevin Bingham. What was your experience and background before you joined FEMA?
Sure. I have a graduate degree in counseling psychology. You're like, how the heck did you end up in this whole gig? Well, I was in the military, and ended up in the intelligence community through the military. And it's just a really weird kind of path. I did not plan to do this, but I'm so grateful to kind of have landed in this spot, in this role. I have a natural proclivity towards technology and that kind of stuff. And so in the intelligence community, and so that's why you're hearing so much of this operational intelligence bit, is because a lot of that is in my background. the intelligence community will take all kinds. Look, they took me, so, they'll take all kinds, and, and it's really blending that human art with the hard science and the technology. And so it's this natural merger of who and what and how I operate. But I'm surrounded by just really brilliant people. I'm a weird case. I'm not your normal, kind of guy, I guess.
I wonder if Kevin was trying to get at what kind of background and would somebody need to come work for you?
Oh, that's much
I don't know
easier.
if that's really what he meant, but
That's a much easier. Oh gosh, I can answer that in 3 letters, a GSP. I love saying this. So a GSP, a generally smart person. I've had a lot of really positive experiences working with all age types, all technology types. If you have common sense and you can do technology and you can communicate, I mean, sometimes the technologists in the room do struggle to communicate. I was on a phone call yesterday and I got lost. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they started talking about ArcPi and all. I'm like, well, I lost, they lost me, they lost me. So, there's got to be a natural proclivity to be able to communicate, but you still need those really techie people because that's their bread and butter, but you got to complement it with somebody that can communicate to a former colonel or 2-star that's trying to figure out how many trucks he needs to send. So it takes all types. GSPs are who we hire, generally smart people.
Yeah, Kevin, go ahead.
So Chris and Rob, I just wanted to say thank you for giving both answers because I think both answers are great, and it's great to hear those stories.
Pleasure.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I got a question. How many people here are dealing with emergencies? Have I convinced you all to drop whatever you're doing and help us out?
Do we have to move to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah. That's a fair question. That's fair. Yeah, well, I mean, there's plenty of organizations, I guess, maybe we could follow up on all this, but, Magic, there's just not enough technologists in emergency management. Emergency management for sure, I think professionally speaking, it's probably only been around 35, 40 years, give or take. And there's just not enough professional technologists, really supporting what is traditionally a pencil and paper kind of community. It's getting there. I think, we're seeing progress, but we need GSPs, in the nonprofit, in the private sector, in the government sector, local, county, state, no matter where you are, you can make a difference. There's plenty of ways to plug in. I've talked about a few of them, but there's plenty of opportunities for you to plug in. I mean, let me just rattle off a few. No endorsements. We're recording, so I definitely want to say no endorsements. So, but things like, we talked a lot about ERISA's GIS core. That's a large crowdsourcing capability. We talked about the building footprints. There's another group out there with USGS. You're going to have them on next month. They have a huge group called the National Map Corps. That's about 7,000 people contributing to the national map. So that's another group out there. Tons of crowdsourcing capabilities that tie into our crowdsourcing unit at FEMA. You think about things like Civil Air Patrol. It's a voluntary organization. By the way, they have the largest UAS fleet in the nation for emergency management, about 2,000. They have stood up a GIS cadre. They're trying to build out everything I just talked about. They're trying to build that out at the local, county, state level, but they're at ground zero. They're just starting it out. They're looking for people to join. I mean, I could just rattle on and on and on. There are all kinds of ways as nonprofits where you are right now to get into the fight and help make a difference. So That's my pitch. How's that?
Good. Yeah. And, there are a few people probably would have been on our call today, but they both work in. One is the name that keeps popping up on our screen, Scott Trapolina. A few people joined our Zoom session today, including you, Chris, had their name show up as Scott. Scott's actually one of our board members, and he's a first responder. He works, he's a fireman and has also worked with Mississippi's Emergency Management Agency, MEMA. And I guess I could mention also that I believe all the states have these state-based emergency management agencies as well, although I don't imagine they're doing anything nearly as high speed as what y'all are doing at FEMA, at least not that I've heard. But they have teams that respond to emergencies within the state, tornadoes and things like that. And so I know he's taken a case full of laptops out to places where they've just had a tornado go through, and they're updating maps in the field and doing that kind of stuff. But he couldn't be on the call because I think there's, with the snow, there's just been a lot of calls to respond to, and he was helping us today. And I know there was one other unfortunately we just didn't have everybody here that because of the weather, but
no, I totally get. Let me respond to that, and I know our time is short, but there's been so many incidents that I've been a part of. I've been lucky to be a part of it, and it almost always. I hope this doesn't scare you, but I've seen it happen more than I want to admit, where there is a GIS guy or gal in a county that's doing parcel updates on Tuesday, and they get a snow or tornado or something, and on Wednesday they're supposed to be this preeminent GIS emergency management all-knowing, all-seeing person. And personally, I've seen so many tornadoes where it's quite frankly, it's just unfair, right? So part of the reason I'm here today is to expand and just kind of broaden that communication and to say, look, there's a community, there's a network, if you just but ask, and so, other large organizations like NAPSG, if you haven't heard about NAPSG, National Alliance for Public Safety, GIS, they do a lot of training and ConOp development, especially related to emergency management. But it doesn't have to be that single resource, that single GIS person in the ground. And especially in COVID, much of this is now virtual. There's a whole virtualized kind of framework to all of this. And the last thing I'll say about it is, I'm really lucky to be at FEMA, but we're doing a lot of really good things. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't want to take anything away from us, but everything we're doing is intentionally built as a framework so it can be pushed forward so that somebody in the field can pick it up. You don't have to develop that AI model. We're open sourcing it. We're putting it out on GitHub. You don't have to build those footprints. We're pushing it out through things like the national map or other constructs. So anything and everything I talked about today is not meant to be exclusive to just FEMA. It's, hey, we spent 300 incidents trying to figure out what didn't work. Do this thing and you'll be successful. That kind of thing. That's where our heart and our passion lies.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Does anybody else have any quick questions before we let you all go? We're coming up on 4 o'clock here. All right, so Chris, thank you so much for taking time today to come speak to us, and we really appreciate it. We really appreciate all that you do. Thanks to everybody that could attend today. I also want to mention that we, Chris, if this is okay with you, we usually post these webinars to our YouTube channel. So we'll get that posted in the next day or two, and then email out. It'll be on our website, and we'll email out the link to everybody. And again, thank you, Chris. Thank you all for attending, and everybody have a wonderful and safe day. Y'all take care.
Thank you so much for being.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
Chris.